Hello, everyone. Nice to see this amazing place. So, quick introduction. My name is Emilio. I've been working in Aave Labs since the beginning, since Aave Labs was not even called Aave Labs, but it was actually called Itland. And I've been supervising the, or being part of the core protocol development since the beginning, since Aave V1. I'm currently Senior VP of Engineering at Aave, and I am supervising, and I have supervised and designed Aave Protocol V4, which was released yesterday. And where is the applause? Come on. Yes. Let's go. Yes, so what are we gonna talk today? Today we are gonna talk what happens now. So a release day is always a big day. Like there is a lot of effort going on. There is a lot of electricity in the air when we release a new product iteration. But immediately after, we start thinking about how we can continue evolving, how we can continue innovating. And today we are going to talk about how Aave Labs, through Aave V4, plans to bring capital markets on chain, right? So let's talk a bit about Aave V4, what's changed. Actually, raise your hand if you tried Aave V4 yet. Okay. Okay, that's an astonishingly low number. So, guys, we have some catch up to do, yeah? Okay, so what changes with V4 compared to Aave V3? So the previous iterations of the protocol, which were iterative over the first release of Aave V1, were all based on the same design, on the same architecture, which was monolithic. The Aave protocol was essentially identified as a market. Every time you wanted to capture a different opportunity in terms of different asset classes, you could, for example, deploy new markets, which brought a variety of complexities around bootstrapping the liquidity and incentivizing bootstrapping the demand so that the flywheel of the yield could start, right? So with Aave V4, we actually have a different approach where there are multiple components within what we can compare to Aave V3 market. So we have a liquidity. The architecture is called hub and spoke design. So we have one liquidity hub and multiple spokes that can be connected to it. So what are the main reasons why we went for this kind of design? What we noticed is while developing the different iterations of Aave, we noticed that the liquidity provisioning part was pretty much common across all the iterations of the protocol that we had. And the only thing that was evolving and changing over time was the borrowing approach, right? So we were keeping adding feature on the borrowing side, while the liquidity provisioning was staying more or less stable over the different iterations. So the idea came to actually abstract away the liquidity provisioning part from the borrowing. So this opens up a lot in terms of design space, because now we can have pluggable borrowing strategies that can actually be integrated into one single hub, all of them sharing the same liquidity. So this allows us to actually move away from one individual borrowing strategies, which is deeply tied in how the protocol works, and actually extend the protocol functional capabilities by adding different borrowing strategies that might be following very heterogeneous approaches, okay? We also added the first iteration of the protocol, which is the one that we deployed yesterday, covers pretty much the same use case as Aave V3 does in a more efficient way, because besides having added new features, which we'll be reviewing quickly here, we also improved a variety of aspects in terms of efficiency, gas cost, and so on. So the initial setup, if you're going to try V4, you will see that there are a variety of different configurations where now you can capture actually different multiple yield opportunities. Also comes with a variety of new features. I'm gonna just list a few. There are many, but like the most important ones. And I'm also going to point out to the docs at the end of the presentation. We have, I would say, the most important ones are the risk premiums and the dynamic risk configuration. So risk premiums are a way for the protocol to price collateral risk independently. This was not possible with Aave V3 because all the assets that were listed as collateral on Aave V3 were sharing the same borrowing costs. With V4, we introduced a new risk lever for risk managers to be able to price risk more appropriately or to manage assets whose risk parameters and risk profile change more drastically over time. The other feature is dynamic risk configuration, where we have now the possibility of changing the configuration for the collaterals in a way that doesn't affect all the borrowers, like it was happening before with previous iterations. But we can basically change the risk configuration only for new users, which opens up to the possibility of having more granular risk control and a better approach towards managing changing market conditions. We also have other features that are very, very important. We added liquidations in a Dutch auction format, which means that now if the risk managers believe it appropriate, the liquidations can be more optimized towards reducing exposure to the protocol or giving more possibilities to borrowers in terms of more optimized liquidations. We have our investment module feature, which in my opinion, especially to this day where the market is a bit on a depressed condition, is very, very important because this will allow the DAO to actually move liquidity across lower risk strategies to optimize yield within Aave markets. Thinking, for example, of stable coins that offer direct staking yield, right? So when we have a float on Aave, like today there are multiple billions of floating liquidity on Aave that are currently unproductive. Thanks to their investment module, we can actually take this liquidity, stake within, for example, the yield redistribution platform of the stablecoin itself, and make it so that like Aave depositors can get optimized yields. And also position managers are a very cool features that we added that basically will allow the DAO to build a variety of tools on top to provide better user experience and better automation. So going back quickly to what we were talking about before, modularity also means scalability. Why? Because thanks to the fact that we have multiple borrowing strategies, we can also implement a variety of approaches that move potentially away from the ERC20 as collateral model, which is what defined pretty much all the lending protocols until today, right? So Aave V4 in reality moves away from like being a pure lending protocol and becomes more of a liquidity provisioning protocol. So multiple borrowing strategies plugging into the same liquidity layer to reduce liquidity fragmentation and to facilitate bootstrap of demand. And with borrowing strategies that are possibly very much heterogeneous and very much different from what we have today. This will allow us to unlock both on-chain and off-chain demand, as we're going to see shortly. So this is one example of what we are going to build over the course of this year and probably the next. There are a couple of examples here, but we are planning to develop actually a lot of new borrowing strategies on top of Aave V4. This is one of the possibilities that Aave V4 unlocks. So at the moment, there is a lot of hidden demand in the forms of assets being deployed in custodians, right? So what happens when a user, users usually use custodians for the added security guarantees because maybe they don't feel comfortable with self-custody, right? This also makes it so, though, that it becomes more complicated to access DeFi tools like Aave, because the assets that I could now use as collateral, they're actually into a custodian infrastructure, right? So one of the ways that we are thinking of unlocking this demand is not to force, for example, custodians to tokenize these positions, but rather to bring the technology to be able to do so directly into their infrastructure, right? So let's imagine that we have a custodian that has a on-chain wallet infrastructure for the custody of the funds. Then we can basically implement a new borrowing strategy in the form of a spoke. This spoke would allow the custodian to plug their custody infrastructure into the spoke, which basically requires only two major constraints. Constraints that require enforced collateralization, so the position remains collateralized at all times, and also a possibility to liquidate these assets. So the possibility for the Aave protocol to access these assets whenever market conditions require these assets to be sold to cover the debt, right? So this would be, in general, what the flow this would represent the execution flow of a potential custodian spoke, integration with the custodian infrastructure, implementation of the hooks to guarantee collateralization constraints and liquidation access. And the DAO reviews and approves the inclusion of this spoke within the hub infrastructure, or deploys a new hub. Another cool feature that we have with Aave V4 is the possibility to share liquidity across hubs. So potentially this could have its own hub with its own liquidity provisioning, but also the possibility to share idle liquidity from other hubs, like for example from the core hub. So here we have a diagram of how this would work. We would have the Aave core hub. The custodian spoke could be integrated directly, for example, into the Aave core hub. Whenever we integrate spokes into hubs, every spoke will have a very precise debt ceiling. So the DAO is basically able to set exact exposure of how much liquidity we want to give access to this particular spoke. So the custodian spoke would integrate with the smart wallet infrastructure of the custodians, would draw liquidity from the Aave core hub up to the caps that were set by the DAO, and the custodian spoke would then enforce collateralization constraints and eventually liquidation if that comes to happen. Another borrowing strategy that we are planning to implement, which is in very high demand today, especially across institutionals, is fixed rate. So fixed rate borrowing with the ability of for borrowers to determine the borrow rates at which they are borrowing to and maturity dates. So until today, basically, the variable rates and perpetual duration of the loans have been dominating the space, right? So Aave has this approach. Pretty much all the competitors have this approach. Some protocols try in the past. We tried also with the previous, before Aave, we had Itland, which was peer-to-peer based. It didn't really pick up much traction back then. And up until today, no protocol basically managed to pick up meaningful traction following this approach. But we are now in a phase where new entities are joining the space in the form of institutional investors, fintech, banks. There is a lot of interest in DeFi across these entities. And most of these entities are actually used to certainty. So these entities usually they want to borrow with predictable terms and predictable maturity dates, and they don't want like their borrow rate starting at 3 and potentially ending at 20, which is something that sometimes happens in DeFi when there are dramatic surges in demand, right? So this is definitely something that we are looking forward to build, and is very high priority for us. Something that we believe will accelerate the adoption of DeFi across the institutional space. We have a variety of designs in mind. Like one potential design is like full peer-to-peer, where you have lenders and borrowers setting up like kind of offers and requests, where you have essentially lenders require a set of collaterals and a certain yield and a certain durations. Borrower offer a certain collateral and a certain borrow rate and a certain duration, and then you match them together. Or we can have a more structured approach where the system automatically offers a set of tranches of in terms of possibilities, so 30, 60, 90, 120 days. And depending on the duration also, it can give a certain borrow rate based on the average variable rate of Aave, for example. So we are exploring both these possibilities, and this would be implemented in the form of a custom spoke that would essentially allow users, suppliers especially, to access the Aave liquidity whenever the liquidity is not matched, right, or not currently utilized in a borrowing position, and then like the liquidity essentially gets matched automatically when a borrower comes with suitable terms. This is, for us, is very important. This is a direct priority, and it's something that we already started working on, and we hope to release as soon as possible. So the cool part of this, that these strategies can be used not only with crypto collateral, but they can be used with any collateral in any form that allows to be connected somehow with the blockchain. So potentially, we could have situations in which the collateral is actually either accessed through a legal infrastructure, that the legal infrastructure posts data, for example, on the spoke, and the spoke uses that data to validate the state of the loan, and the collateral can, for example, be, if needed, liquidated off-chain, and the debt repaid automatically on-chain, or if the asset is suitable to be tokenized, it can be tokenized, and tokenized representations can be used on-chain. With Aave V4, we can easily leverage both options, and the cool part is that the DAO can actually become an off-chain custodian as well. The DAO could play a role in which the DAO acts as an intermediary of these spokes to be able to make the off-chain agreements work. So as I mentioned before, these are only a few of the ideas that we have going forward. I believe that these spokes ultimately will allow Aave to access billions in idle demand that cannot be accessed today. And the role of the governance will be key, because the role of the governance will be to actually validate the correct implementation of these spokes, and through risk managers guarantee that the risk exposure of the protocol remains within the boundary of safety. Yeah, this is pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed. I want to say Stani yesterday finished with DeFi will win, and I will finish with thanks to Aave V4, Aave will win. Thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed, and try Aave V4.